My name is Caroline Mayfield. I'm 42, divorced, no children, and until a year ago, I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a flower shop I could barely afford. My life was quiet, unremarkable, but stable. That was before my father, Richard Mayfield, came knocking on my door with trembling hands and a voice that no longer held the authority I'd known my whole life. "Caroline," he said, not even sitting down. "It's bad. Mayfield Textiles it's going under." My father built the company in the 80s, growing it from a small local manufacturer into a respected name across the East Coast. He used to bring home swatches and show me how to tell silk from satin. He built something real. But times changed, and my father didn't. He refused to go digital. He refused to downsize. He refused to listen. I hadn't worked at the company since I left after college. Not by choice. He didn't believe women had a head for business. My younger sister, Lila, stayed. Blonde, bubbly, compliant. She married a man from a good family and learned how to host benefits and smile in board meetings. That was enough for Dad. I was the daughter who asked too many questions. So I left. But now, here he was, asking me for help. And despite everything, I said yes. I didn't sleep the first week. I studied the books, reviewed the contracts, talked to the suppliers he hadn't spoken to in years. The company was bleeding out through 1,000 tiny cuts. But it wasn't too late. I took a leave from my marketing job, moved into a dusty guest room in the family estate. Lila called it heroic. I called it temporary. 3 months later, we signed the deal that saved the company. I negotiated with a major retailer to take on our inventory in bulk, streamlined operations, let go of half the board who were coasting on favors from the 90s. For the first time in a decade, Mayfield Textiles posted a profit. The old employees started smiling again. Dad threw a dinner party, toasted me in front of everyone, called me his lion-hearted girl. I believed him. Until 6 weeks later. That was when he called a family board meeting. Just him, Lila, and me. He cleared his throat, looked at me without smiling. "Caroline, you've done wonders. But the board believes Lila's more suited for long-term leadership." I looked at Lila. She blinked, playing the innocent, then looked down at her notes, like she hadn't been waiting her whole life for this moment. I said nothing, just nodded. My hands were shaking under the table. Then he said, "Of course, you'll still get your bonus." Bonus, as if I'd been an intern. I left the room without saying a word. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I stayed on the estate 2 more nights after the board meeting. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to watch. Listen. People slip up when they think you've stopped paying attention. The first night, I passed Lila in the hall. She wore one of Mother's old robes, all silk and delicate lace, and carried a glass of wine like it was part of her hand. She didn't look surprised to see me. She smiled. "Don't take it personally, Caro," she said softly. "Dad just trusts me to keep the vision alive. You're brilliant, but you don't really belong here." There it was. That perfect sugary poison she's been serving since we were kids. I wanted to ask her what exactly she thought the vision was, but I didn't. Instead, I spent the next day watching how she moved in the office. She kept meetings short, called people darling and sweetheart. I noticed how the male department heads smiled at her, but also how little they actually listened. They nodded, then did what they wanted. No one respected her, but no one challenged her either. She was comfortable. Too comfortable. Meanwhile, I quietly made calls. I still had the contact list I'd built when saving the company. Vendors, consultants, junior executives, people who owed me favors, or simply admired how I'd turned things around. That night, I found an old filing cabinet in the East Wing, dusty and neglected. Inside were decades of paperwork, client agreements, old investment documents, and something else. A document signed by Richard and our late Uncle Joseph, detailing a dormant subsidiary company, Mayfield Holdings, LLC, set up during a brief expansion effort in the early 2000s, then quietly shelved. Still technically owned by Mayfield Textiles, but with its own structure, its own account, and with enough of a paper trail to show I'd had a hand in revitalizing it without breaching any NDAs or contracts from my bonus agreement. I smiled, not out of joy, out of recognition. My father thought he was playing chess, but he'd left the board wide open. The next morning, I packed my things and left the estate. I didn't say goodbye. On the train back to the city, I made a single phone call. "Eleanor," I said, "it's Caroline Mayfield. I need help setting up a consultancy firm, discreetly, and I have a business proposal that I think will interest you." Eleanor Smith had been the CFO of a rival textile firm until they forced her out for being too aggressive. We had lunch once, years ago, after a conference. She told me if I ever wanted to burn something down, she'd bring the matches. She laughed when I reminded her. "Oh, Caroline," she said, "I've been waiting for your call." Eleanor and I met at a quiet wine bar off Lexington. She looked exactly how I remembered. Sharp eyes, even sharper posture. She didn't waste time. "I've already pulled the corporate structure on Mayfield Holdings," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "You were smart not to dissolve it. It's been collecting dust, but it's intact. And more importantly, so is the tax shield around it." We spent the next hour sketching the bones of the plan. Mayfield Holdings would become a strategic consulting group. Eleanor had contacts in logistics, procurement, and textile design. I had access to supplier relationships and vendor contracts from my time reviving Mayfield Textiles. The idea was simple: undercut Mayfield Textiles at every turn, quietly. We wouldn't touch the same clients directly, yet, but we'd make our presence known in the margins, in the whispers, in the back channels of the industry where real deals get made. The emotional part of me still wanted answers, though. Why had Richard done this? Why choose Lila? It was that night, going through old letters in a box from Mother, that I found a clue: an unsent birthday card from my 12th birthday, written in my mother's careful, cursive hand. "She won't say it, but she's proud of you. Your father doesn't understand girls like you. Too smart, too fast for him. He was raised to think daughters should smile, not lead." That hit harder than I expected. I remembered one afternoon when I was 10, sitting at the dinner table with my science trophy in hand. Richard barely looked up, but when Lila brought home a ribbon from a school play, he clapped until his hands turned red. It wasn't Lila's fault she was what he wanted, but it didn't make it hurt less. I told Eleanor the next morning, "I don't want to destroy them. I want to make myself impossible to ignore." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a better kind of revenge. Lasts longer." We hired our first staff quietly: remote analysts, freelance procurement experts, design consultants. No flash, just precision. Then came our first real strike. An Italian manufacturer I'd worked with during the recovery, Valente Textiles, hadn't renewed their contract with Mayfield. Lila never followed up. I did. Over espresso in Milan, I told Giovanni Valente, "I'm back in the game, smaller scale, but smarter." He didn't hesitate. "You're the reason I got paid on time last year. We work with you." And just like that, our first client signed. I didn't tell my father, or Leela, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they noticed the slow leak under their feet. 2 weeks after landing Valenti, we signed a distribution consulting contract with a Canadian startup that had previously approached Mayfield and been ignored. Eleanor called it low-hanging fruit. I called it a missed opportunity. We picked up 3 more mid-tier contracts that month. Quiet work, below the radar, but it sent small ripples through the industry. Then came the invitation. A regional trade summit in Boston. Mayfield Textiles would be speaking on a panel about innovation in heritage brands. Lila was the scheduled speaker. Eleanor and I, attending under Mayfield Holdings, would be there as well. It was too good to resist. I want her to see me, I told Eleanor. Not out of spite. Just to remind her I still exist. Eleanor smirked. You want her to wonder how you got in. The night before the summit, I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering a memory I hadn't touched in years. I was 13, and Dad had taken Lila to a golf course with one of his partners. I waited at the window for hours, dressed in khakis and a collared shirt. He never invited me. When he came home, sunburned and smiling, he said, "You wouldn't have liked it, sweetie. Too boring for someone like you. Someone like me." At the summit, Lila looked polished but strained. Her smile was rehearsed. I watched her from the crowd. She spoke in vague platitudes about honoring tradition while embracing change. A few people nodded. Others checked their phones. Then a journalist asked a question about Valenti Textiles' sudden exit from their supply list. Lila hesitated. We chose to part ways due to strategic differences. I could see her left hand twitch. Later, in the hallway, she spotted me. Her face stiffened. "Caroline," she said, as if my name was a problem she needed to fix. "I didn't know you were still involved." "I'm not," I replied evenly. "I'm simply expanding." Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "Dad doesn't like surprises." "He'll adjust," I said. "He's had practice." That night, Eleanor and I celebrated over champagne in our hotel room. "I don't think she knows yet," she said. "Not fully." "She will," I replied. "But by then, she'll be reacting, not leading." The next morning, a former Mayfield accountant, Alan Ridge, messaged me privately. He wanted to meet, said he had something to share. I wasn't sure what he knew, but I had a feeling the cracks were beginning to show. Alan Ridge insisted we meet in person. "Discretion," he said. We chose a corner booth at a downtown cafe, public enough for safety, quiet enough for secrets. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. Guilt-ridden. "I never wanted to be part of this," he said without preamble, "but I needed the paycheck." "Part of what?" I asked. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, and signed authorizations. Some forged, some manipulated. Numbers didn't lie. Lila had been moving money. Slowly, strategically, channeling company funds into a marketing firm on the West Coast, run by her husband's cousin. Inflated invoices, duplicate charges, all approved under her signature. I blinked. She's laundering money? She'd call it outsourced partnerships. But yes, essentially, Alan said. It's bleeding the company, quietly. No one on the board's paying attention. Your father signs off on everything she puts in front of him. And why are you telling me now? He looked down at his coffee. Because when you came back, I thought maybe, just maybe, there's someone who still cares what happens to that place. Lila's not evil, but she's reckless, and she doesn't understand consequence. I walked home with the folder pressed to my chest like a loaded weapon. I spent the next 3 days reviewing every document. Eleanor confirmed the pattern. The scale wasn't massive, yet, but it was enough to eventually trigger an audit. Enough to bury Mayfield Textiles under the weight of its own negligence. Eleanor leaned back in her chair after reviewing it all. "We could take this public." "No," I said. "Not yet. I want to give her a choice." "You think she'll choose wisely?" "I think she'll panic." I drafted a letter, not to Lila, yet, but to one of the board members I remembered respecting, Paul Kern. Old school, quiet, but principled. I included copies of 3 forged invoices and asked for a meeting. I didn't sign the letter with my new title. I signed it with my old one. Caroline Mayfield, Strategic Advisor, former. I wanted them to remember who had saved them before. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at a photo of Mother. She was laughing in it, one of the rare ones. I couldn't remember what had made her smile like that. I whispered, "Am I doing the right thing?" Silence. Only the sound of the city outside my window. The next morning, Paul Kern called. "I'll meet you," he said. "And Caroline, thank you for not going to the press." Yet. Paul Kern met me at an old members club in Midtown. Quiet, wood-paneled, filled with the kind of men my father always respected. Gray-haired, slow-spoken, steeped in tradition. He wore a somber expression and held the folder I had sent in both hands, as if it might burn him. "I'll admit," he began, "I didn't believe it at first, but I've reviewed the documents. You're not wrong." I stayed silent. Let him sit with it. "She's clever," he continued. "Not intelligent, mind you, clever. She knew just how much to move without raising alarm. And Richard, well, he signs anything she puts in front of him these days." "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why is he so blind to it?" Paul sighed and leaned back. "Because he's old, tired, and because after your mother passed, he clung to what made him feel comfortable. Lila didn't challenge him. She became his mirror. You, Caroline, you were always his storm." That stung, because it was true. "I'm not asking you to oust her," I said. "I just want the bleeding to stop." Paul gave a slow nod. "Let me handle it internally. If we go public now, it'll kill the company. Quiet inquiries first. A third-party audit. But Caroline, this isn't going to stay quiet forever." "I know." Later that week, Eleanor and I sat in her loft, cross-checking supplier logs when she asked, "What if it doesn't work? What if Paul gets spooked?" "Then we escalate," I said. "But not until I'm sure Lila won't fix it by turning the blame elsewhere." Eleanor hesitated, then said, "I know what that's like." She told me about her old job, how she'd uncovered a financial discrepancy at her firm and flagged it, only to be pushed out quietly by the same men who'd praised her for her aggressive insight. They said she was divisive, too emotional, too proud. "I've spent 5 years proving I'm not crazy," she said softly. "Helping you. It feels like redemption." I reached across the table, took her hand briefly. "You're not crazy. You're necessary." Meanwhile, subtle signs of Mayfield Holdings' success began creeping into industry talk. A trade blog mentioned a boutique consultancy quietly shaking up supplier negotiations. A procurement director told a colleague he was going where the real thinkers are. Back at Mayfield, Lila began to panic. Alan messaged again. "She's holding emergency strategy meetings. No structure, no agenda. She's unraveling." Good. But not enough. I wasn't just waiting for her to fall. I was preparing to take her place. The first ripple hit 3 days after my meeting with Paul. Mayfield Textiles sent out a clarification statement to partners and vendors about their internal accounting practices. It was vague, corporate, and reeked of damage control. Eleanor read it over lunch and laughed. This is what people do when they think something's coming, but don't know from where. Meanwhile, Alan confirmed what we suspected. Paul had initiated a discreet third-party audit, not officially announced, but already causing tension behind Mayfield's glass doors. Lila was reportedly furious. She called it a witch hunt, claimed someone was sabotaging her from within. According to Alan, her staff were walking on eggshells. Then came the invitation, Richard's birthday, a formal dinner at the estate. I hadn't been invited to one of those in years. I stared at the ivory envelope like it might bite me. "You going?" Eleanor asked. "I have to. It'll tell me everything I need to know." I arrived late on purpose. The dining room was filled with old names, friends of Richard's, former clients, board members. Lila was there, dressed in emerald green, sipping wine and pretending her world wasn't on fire. When she saw me, her smile barely held. "Didn't expect to see you," she said through her teeth. "I'm hard to get rid of," I replied. Richard stood at the head of the table, older than I remembered. He looked tired, more than tired, hollow. When he toasted, his voice cracked. "To family, to loyalty." The word hung in the air like smoke. After dinner, Paul pulled me aside in the hallway. "They're getting nervous," he said. "The auditors found inconsistencies already." "Enough to act on?" He hesitated. "Give it a few more days, then it'll be undeniable." Lila found me just as I was getting ready to leave. Her eyes, glassy but sharp, locked onto mine. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I don't play to win," I said. "I play to survive." She stepped closer. "He'll never choose you, Caroline, no matter what you prove." I smiled. "He won't have to." I left without saying goodbye to Richard. Back in the city, I gave Eleanor the update. "We're almost there," I said, "but we need one more move. Something that makes the board look at me and see a future." "You want them to see you the way your father never could," she said gently. "No," I whispered. "I want them to see the truth, and then regret they ever looked away." The audit report landed on Paul Kern's desk Monday morning. By Wednesday, 3 more board members had seen it. By Friday, Lila was summoned to an emergency executive session. "Not invited, Richard." Paul told me quietly. "They want him insulated until they decide what to do. He's too compromised." Eleanor and I were already 3 steps ahead. We finalized a presentation, 20 slides that told the truth without bitterness. Data, trends, solutions. Then one final slide. Just 3 words in clean serif font. "We begin again." "I'm not burning the house down," I said to Eleanor. "I'm rebuilding the foundation." She nodded. "Just make sure they see that before she torches the whole thing herself." Lila didn't go quietly. She tried to reassign blame, first to her CFO, then to a junior consultant who hadn't been at the company long enough to tie his own shoes, let alone orchestrate a paper trail. Then she spun a narrative about being set up by competitors, jealous of Mayfield's rebirth. But the board had the documents, the money, the signatures. Richard, when finally told, reportedly sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then he said, "She meant well." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. On Monday morning, I was invited to present to the board. I walked into the boardroom not with vengeance, but with clarity. The room was quiet. Most of them avoided my gaze. Paul gave me a small nod. "I'm not here to drag anyone," I said at the start. "I'm here because this company still has a future. But it can't move forward the way it's been moving. We can't pretend tradition is enough anymore." I outlined a restructuring plan, a partnership model that would incorporate Mayfield Holdings back under the umbrella, bringing modern systems, digital strategies, and ethical leadership. I didn't mention Lila by name. I didn't need to. When I finished, no one clapped. But no one questioned either. "We'll deliberate," said Helen Reyes, a board member who'd once refused to shake my hand at a conference. Outside in the corridor, Richard was waiting. He looked smaller than I remembered. His skin pale, his shoulders hunched. "You think you've proven something," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I've built something." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand loyalty." "I understand silence isn't loyalty," I said. "It's fear, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." He didn't answer. Later that night, Eleanor opened a bottle of champagne. "To the end?" she said. I shook my head. "To the beginning." The board took 48 hours. On Wednesday morning, Paul called. "They voted," he said. 7-2 in favor. I didn't speak. "They want you to return, officially. Interim CEO for now, with full executive authority. Your plan is being adopted, effective immediately. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, staring out the window. A woman jogged by with her dog. A bus passed. Somewhere across town, Lila was reading the same email I had just received. Are they removing her? I asked. They're calling it a transition in leadership. She's been offered a consulting position, likely just a formality. And my father? Paul hesitated. He didn't object. He didn't speak. I wasn't surprised. He wouldn't fight, but he wouldn't support me either. He'd simply vanish behind the legacy he built, unable to face how he'd nearly ruined it. Eleanor arrived 10 minutes later with bagels and black coffee. I showed her the email. She read it twice, then grinned. You did it. No, I said. We did. That day, I walked into the Mayfield building, not as a daughter, not as a shadow, but as a leader. Some staff looked away when I passed. Others nodded carefully, sensing the winds had changed. I greeted everyone by name, made no speeches, and went straight to the executive floor. Lila was already packing. She didn't look surprised to see me. Dad didn't even call, she said quietly, after everything I did for him. Sometimes, I replied, we give everything to people who were never capable of giving back. She studied me for a long moment. You think I'm the villain? No, I said. I think you were handed a role you never earned, and you believed that made it yours. Lila didn't argue. She just zipped her bag and stood. For what it's worth, she said, I always envied you. You made Dad uncomfortable. I just tried to make him proud. And then she was gone. That evening, I sat alone in the CEO's office, once my father's, then Lila's. I opened the bottom drawer and found an old brass key. I recognized it instantly. It was the key to my mother's hope chest, the one she kept in the attic, filled with letters and blueprints for a children's fabric line she never launched. I took the key in my hand and held it tightly. That night, I called Eleanor. I want to build something in her name, quiet, but lasting. I know just the people, she said, and you finally have the power to do it. My first week as CEO wasn't triumphant. It was exhausting. The books were a mess. The staff were uneasy. The board was polite but watchful, like they were waiting to see if I'd break under the weight they'd finally let me carry. But I didn't. I started by listening, really listening. I held meetings with every department head, not in the boardroom, but in their own spaces. I asked them what was broken, what they were afraid to say before. They told me, and I wrote everything down. Eleanor worked late beside me every night. She refused a formal role, but her fingerprints were everywhere. In the projections, in the language of our new policy drafts, in the way we began to rebuild from the inside. One evening, after we signed off on a supplier deal under our new ethical sourcing policy, she looked at me and said, "You don't just want to run Mayfield. You want to change it." I nodded. If all I do is keep the machine running, then what was all this for? 2 weeks later, I reopened the attic at the estate. The air was heavy with dust and old dreams. I found the hope chest, still locked, and used the brass key. Inside, fabric samples, hand-sketched patterns, marketing mock-ups. My mother's vision for a children's line, soft textiles, playful prints, stories sewn into the seams. I brought them into the office and laid them out on the conference table. The staff walked by and stopped. One designer, Rosa, cried when she saw the pages. She was ahead of her time, Rosa whispered. She just ran out of it, I said. I announced the launch of the Eliza collection the next quarter, named after my mother, built from her original designs, updated by our current team. A portion of all profits would go to textile scholarships for women in underserved communities. The board approved it unanimously. Richard never came to see it. But he did send one letter, No return address. Just a typed note. I still don't understand you, but I was wrong. That much I know. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. Lila moved to Seattle. I heard she started a boutique firm with her husband. She never reached out. I didn't expect her to. On the day the Eliza collection launched, Eleanor stood beside me as we unveiled the first run in a small gallery space downtown. No fanfare, just clients, friends, and quiet legacy. I used to think burning it all down was the only way to be seen, she said. And now, she smiled, now I think building something better is the louder statement. I looked around at the people gathered, the fabric swatches on display, the name Mayfield hanging on the wall, no longer just a shadow of my father's. I didn't take anything from them, I said aloud. I just took back what was mine all along.